that with a piano. I wish CCA could claim that we trained him, but we did not. Thank you, Eddie. That was wonderful. It is now my privilege to introduce to you our speaker this evening, Dr. Wilfred McClay, for our featured lecture that he is entitled The Most Humanizing of the Arts, History as a Way of Knowing. Dr. McClay holds the Victor Davis Hanson Chair in Classical History and Western Civilization at Hillsdale College. Before taking his post at Hillsdale, he was the GT and Libby Blankenship Chair in the History of Liberty at the University of Oklahoma, and the director of the Center for the History of Liberty. His book, The Masterless, Self and Society in Modern America, received the 1995 Merle Curti Award of the Organization of American Historians for the best book in American intellectual history. Dr. McClay served for 11 years on the National Council on the Humanities. He is currently a member of the U.S. Commission on the Semi-Quincentennial, which has been charged with planning the celebration of our nation's 250th birthday in 2026. His list of additional honors and scholarly achievements is long and impressive, but even more than that, Dr. McClay is something of the embodiment of the classical tradition of teaching and learning that we aspire to here at Columbus Classical Academy. A man who, I believe, understands the great paradox of liberty and learning, just as C.S. Lewis did when he wrote, "Political democracy is doomed if it tries to extend its demand for equality into these higher spheres. Ethical, intellectual, or aesthetic democracy is death. For a truly democratic education, one which will preserve democracy, must be, in its own field, ruthlessly aristocratic, shamelessly highbrow." I would submit to you that your being here today to sit and learn under Dr. McClay for a time is not just an engaging evening of intellectual and aesthetic excellence, it's an exercise in the preservation of liberty. So please welcome to the stage for a truly democratic education this evening, Dr. Wilfred McClay.
Thanks so much. I'm really delighted to be here. We've tried to do this before, and it sort of went gaflooey at the last moment, so I'm really happy. I'm here. Nothing can stop us now. And I'm so excited to actually see this school. I met Sarah Spalding, what was it, 2 years ago? Where are you? Anyway, she's here somewhere. At the college, and she said, "Oh, we're about to open." I think it was the summer before the school opened, and she said, "You know," and I said, "Well, please, I'd love to come visit." And she said, she has had her hook in me ever since, and it's a very pleasant hook to have. So it's great to be here. I was going to try to do a few things today, and actually the title. I'd forgotten what title I'd given months ago, but I will be actually get to that at the very end. So bear with me. But what I want to really talk about is the beginning is why I wrote this book, not The Masterless, which you were kind enough to mention, but this book, Land of Hope, which I think the Young Readers Edition of it is being used here, and hopefully when you have 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders, they will, at whatever point you expose them to American history, they'll read it, and I'll come and talk to them. But there's a real question to be asked: why did I write the book? Why did I do this? And any of you who know anything about academia know that writing textbooks is not the way to get ahead and impress people, impress your dean, get raises, get promotions, and all that. It's looked down on, and that's part of what's wrong, frankly, with the culture of academia. But that's not what I'm here to talk about tonight. But I wrote the book because I was concerned about the rising ignorance of the past that I saw in my students, even my very good students, and more generally in the rising generations. A loss of the sense of the past, a loss of the sense of America as a nation that has a great story, and a story that's not over, a story in which they are embodied, embedded, being carried along, whether they know it or not, whether they appreciate it or not. So to bring that sense to a consciousness and an informed way seem to me what we should be doing and have not been doing in recent years in teaching history, to the extent we teach it at all. It's faded in curricula, all over the place. So let's see. So I began, and actually there's some more reasons why I wrote the book that I'm going to tell you in due course. But when I started writing it, I had two things. I had the title, Land of Hope, and I had this quotation I'm about to read you, which is the epigraph of the book, the quotation that you see at the beginning, ahead of the title page. This is longer than most of those. Those are usually a sentence or two. This is a couple paragraphs, but I think you'll see why when I read it. It was written by the novelist John Dos Passos, of whom more in a moment. So it goes like this. Every generation rewrites the past. In easy times, history is more or less of an ornamental art. But in times of danger, we're driven to the written record by a pressing need to find answers to the riddles of today. We need to know what kind of firm ground other men belonging to generations before us have found to stand on. In spite of changing conditions of life, they were not very different from ourselves. Their thoughts were the grandfathers of our thoughts. They managed to meet situations as difficult as those we have to face, and to meet them sometimes lightheartedly, and in some measure to make their hopes prevail. We need to know how they did it. That's the first paragraph of the epigraph. I think that's pretty good, but this is even better. And I think of it as applying to the times we're living in. In times of change and danger, when there's a quicksand of fear under men's reasoning, a sense of continuity with generations gone before can stretch like a lifeline across the scary present and get us past that idiot delusion of the exceptional now that blocks good thinking. That's why in times like ours, when old institutions are caving in and being replaced by new institutions, not necessarily in accord with most men's preconceived hopes, political thought has to look backwards as well as forwards, which is what classical education does, right? And this is from an essay Dos Passos wrote, The Uses of the Past, published in the year 1941. Now some of you will have associations with that year. I actually was born on December 7th, 1951. So Pearl Harbor Day has always been part of my life, for better or worse. But this was published early in 1941, before the United States was involved in the war, and when in fact we were trying very hard to stay out of it, at least in some quarters we were. It was hotly debated topic. And the reason I wanted to mention that is Dos Passos, he's an interesting life. He started out as a writer as an extreme leftist, a revolutionary. And over time, he kind of moderated and saw the light, shall we say, but became a great defender of American history, American institutions. And the book from which this essay, The Uses of the Past, comes is called The Ground We Stand On. So he became, in his middle age, aware of the way in which the constitutional framework and the institutions of liberty that had been established by the founders underwrit everything that he saw as important to American society and American distinctiveness. We Americans need to know our history. We need to know it better than we have in the past, because we're not a people bound together by blood and soil. We're a people with origins in many bloods and soils, linked by shared aspirations and principles embodied in shared institutions and embedded in a shared history, a history full of triumphs and shared sufferings. These things must be taught and learned by each successive generation. And there's a growing danger, as I said at the outset, that we're failing to do this, failing to pass along the knowledge of these things to our posterity with consequences that are untold, although I think we've actually begun to see some of them in recent years. We've neglected an essential element in the formation of citizens of a republic, when we fail to provide the young with an accurate, responsible, and inspiring account of their own country, an account that will inform and deepen their own sense of identification with the land they inhabit and equip them for the responsibilities of citizenship. And his citizenship, when I say citizenship, I mean something more than just voting, sort of what some of the older among us who went to civics class learned about civics. It means, I think, a vivid and enduring sense of one's membership in this society, membership in one of the greatest enterprises in human history, the astonishing story of our own country. That's what the formal study of American history should provide, particularly on the K-12 level. And that's what we're failing to do. The most recent tests administered by the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is sometimes called the nation's report card, shows it's an imperfect metric, but nevertheless, it shows a steady decline over the years in history and geography scores, and at best flatlining in civics. The reasons for this are many, but as people who've studied this have repeatedly said, it's time for educational policymakers, commentators, officials to assist the schools recommit themselves to teaching history, geography, and civics as essential content in the education of the young. I don't think I need to preach about that here, but it's a problem afflicting education more generally, and particularly mainstream public education. So I wrote Land of Hope, trying to, in my very small Lilliputian way, to address this problem, provide a clear, fresh, and thoughtful invitation. I call it an invitation to the great American story, an invitation to this story that does not pretend to be complete or definitive. When people do that, they make books that are unreadable, that you don't want to read. I mean, eating your broccoli seems fun by comparison to reading such a book. I've tried not to make this a broccoli book. It's not quite candy, but you know, I hope it has some of that quality to it. It would be presumptuous to try to say I'm telling the whole story, because the story's not done. The story is far from done. I think we kind of feel this, particularly at this particular historical moment. New things are possible. Old things are possible, even better. So what I tried to do was to present the skeleton of the story, the bones of the story, the indispensable underlying structure, and get people interested, get young people in particular interested. But I have to say one of the surprises of the book is that so far most of our sales have gone to grown-ups, to people who had a terrible education in history and came across the book and said, wow, this is a delight to read. I really wanted, above all, to make people want to read it and not to make it too tedious, to make it fun, make it enjoyable, pleasurable. There's no reason why it has to be a great pain. So I had many motives, but I never thought I'd have the bulk of sales. I never thought it would be reviewed in the Wall Street Journal, and the Wall Street Journal would write an article about me, and you know, they don't usually do that for high school textbooks, but so it served an audience I wasn't expecting. But I mainly mean it. I'm mainly interested in young people, and in doing something for them. Let me begin this part of my talk with an anecdote, or sort of anecdotally. And it's the problem of what I call the problem of the two defaults. And anybody here who's taught anything, actually, not just history, will know what I'm talking about. That when you ask students a question, particularly something for like an essay test or maybe an oral examination, and they don't have the slightest idea, they just don't know what you're talking about. They'll when I was in school, and even when I was started teaching, the first default was to say, let's just say, why was Andrew Jackson so hostile to the Bank of the United States? And students have no idea what any of it is. He doesn't know who Andrew Jackson is. He's been playing whatever, tiddlywinks in the back of the room, whatever we did in the 50s, 60s, before there were devices. And he said, well, Andrew Jackson was so the default number one goes like this. This is what we would have done in the 50s and 60s, maybe even the 70s. Andrew Jackson was a great man, one of the great leaders of our great country. And the reason that he opposed the bank was because he did not think it was worthy of American greatness. And by the way, we're the greatest country in the world. And thinking that this is what I wanted to hear, I mean, history teachers just, American history teachers, they go to bed with the flag clutched to their bosom, and it didn't work very well with me, as you can tell. But it was this default was the general default that you found everywhere. So fast forward to the last 15 years or so. Well, Andrew Jackson, the National Bank, used the same example. Well, Jackson was a perfidious man, a slaveholder, an Indian hater who raped the land, and who was and he was the leader of a country that's guilty, that's perfidious, that rapes the land. Exceptional. People talk about American exceptionalism. We're exceptional only in how bad we are. So whatever the opposite of stars and stripes for never would be that default. And something or maybe, let me be a little more generous. Maybe the answer would be something about, well, Andrew Jackson was a man of his times and was very, as I said, everybody else is a man of forever. But he was a man of his times, and he shared the prejudices of his time. He was ethnocentric and white supremacist. And so, Anyway, that's another way of trying to cover the fact that you don't know what you're talking about. And so you invoke default number two, which is, America's evil, right? Right? You give me an A if I say America's evil? No. So now this is partly the effect of, again, to be a little bit more fair, the textbooks that students have had. In particular, one textbook in particular, Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, has been, if the cover of Time magazine were ever devoted to a book that not for its goodness, but for its influence, this book, which has sold 4 or 5 million copies, last I counted, and continues to even pretty good schools that I've visited. I asked them, what do they use? They Howard Zinn, and it's just amazing how pervasive Howard Zinn has a black and white view of American history, and everybody that you're taught to admire is evil, wears a black hat, and it's the masses, starting with the Indians, the Arawaks that Columbus discovered, on down to the labor movement of the 19th and 20th century. It's always the good guys are always the losers, and the bad guys are on top. Yeah, there's the movie Good Will Hunting has a scene in which one of the characters says, "Man, you got to read Howard Zinn. He'll blow your mind." And so Howard Zinn's really been very influential. And I actually had in my mind a counter Zinn with my book. You won't find his name in it. You won't find any reference to, well, a little bit, in one or two places, a reference to the kinds of arguments he makes. But by and large, I simply sort of swept that away and tried to tell the story with an unprejudiced, non-ideological way that gives a fair accounting of our defects, but also a fair accounting of our virtues, which outweigh the defects. And it's really very important that young people learn that. One of my inspirations in writing the book was a friend, a lawyer friend, who said to me, he heard I was writing this. We had dinner together, and he said that I really believe that if young people are taught that there's nothing admirable in their regime, that is the form of government under which they live, it will damage their souls. And, I had never really thought about it that way. I thought about it as a sort of informational problem. If they don't know the history. But to learn a false history, one that it enjoins upon you that in the name of intellectual honesty, you have to repudiate your country, its values, your ancestors. There's a whole lot of baggage that goes with that. That this was a momentous thing. So I had, if anything, inflated sort of expectations of myself in writing the book. I wanted to save souls the current default number 2. It's not just Howard Zinn. It's a reflection of the ambient culture, Hollywood culture, popular culture, but it's ignorant. It's not just that it's negative, it's also that it's ignorant. It's wrong. Neither default really is any good. The old one was deserved to be replaced, but not by default number 2. We need a different kind of history. And here I'll lay out some of the things I tried to do, and I hope others will do. Incidentally, my publisher is Encounter Books it's about to come out with a Western Civ textbook that covers everything from antiquity to the present, the day before yesterday, and includes Europe, includes Asia, it's mostly Western, so it actually is in the title. It's called The Golden Thread, and that's going to be very exciting when that comes out. We really think of this as a companion to Land of Hope. So what we're trying to restore the level of quality that Mr. Gibson was talking about. The level of excellence in history education, and give teachers the tools to work with. So we found out that it was not enough to write a good textbook. You have to have ancillary materials. You have to have we have a teacher's guide. We have a student workbook. We've got a website coming, a curriculum, all kinds of goodies. And that website's going to be wonderful. It has clips from movies and songs and all kinds of good stuff. So different kind of history. We need a history that recovers what I call the American story. And that is, a story is something that gives a kind of unity to otherwise unrelated events. If you can see what has unfolded over our history as a story of human liberty, a story of America realizing some of the aspirations of the entirety of Western civilization for a long period of time. without being too heavy-handed about that. But, and actually, this does remind me of one of the things I wanted to read to you from, I've got several passages in the book that I want to read to you, and this is right in the beginning. The first chapter is One Long Story. That's what it's called, One Long Story. And I say, for the human animal, meaning is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Without it, we perish. Historical consciousness is to civilized society what memory is to the individual person. Without memory, without the stories in which our memories are carried forward, we cannot say who or what we are. Without them, our life and thought dissolve into a meaningless rush of events. The stakes were beautifully expressed in the words of the great Jewish writer Isaac Bashevis Singer, and he says this: when a day passes, it is no longer there. What remains of it? Nothing more than a story. If stories weren't told or books weren't written, man would live like the beasts, only for the day. The whole world, all human life, is one long story. And that was another passage that inspired me as I was writing how to... The hardest thing about the book, by the way, is deciding what not to include. Because there are many things. And, I get letters all the time from people who say, why didn't you have something about this? Why didn't you have something about that? What about the Lithuanian coal miners? It's hard. It's hard. But part of what I always had to ask myself was, what is going to propel this forward as a story, as a convincing story of America? Second, we need a history instruction in high schools that conveys not just the coarseness and failures of America, but the grandeur of America, the aspirational quality of this country. I contend that the United States is the most aspirational nation in human history. And one way to measure that is that we almost all have a sense that, first of all, that we want our children to exceed, to excel even over what we've achieved. And we do not believe anyone should be compelled, imprisoned by the conditions of their birth. That everyone should have the opportunity to rise in the world. That's just sort of baked in with the American. I'm not going to use DNA. I hate that particular comparison, but it's baked in, baked into the details. So, 3, understand that history is not a morality play. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens in human history. More of it in other parts of the world than here, but we have our share, and it won't do to try to cover it up or explain it away. The important thing is to keep it in proper perspective, to have a sense of proportion, and that's what the Howard Zinn followers lack, I think, and an awful lot of people who go for default number 2 lack. Number 4, the importance of shared memories to our cohesion as a people is a part of our history. And I don't really mean nationalism here, which is sort of a dirty word with some people, but this sense that we're in this together. We can't achieve our shared goals, whatever they may be. Let me use one that's a favorite of the left, healthcare, national healthcare. Well, you're not going to get well, you may not get it any which way, a system of national health care, but you're certainly not going to get one if we don't have a sense of shared memories, shared aspirations, of being all in this together. And that there's no better way to achieve that than to have a common and shared story that all of us look to. 5th of my criteria here, is that we need to balance critical thinking, which I think is one of the most empty buzzwords of the present day. We foster critical thinking here XU. Well, that's a way of saying we don't teach anything in particular, right? It's a way of saying we don't prescribe anything. We don't believe in anything except criticism. Whatever you throw out, this is wrong with it. Look, critical thinking is a good thing in its proper place. It's sort of like G.K. Chesterton's famous line about it's the purpose of having an open mind is like having an open mouth so that you can close on something. An apple or whatever you're having for dinner. I think we need appreciative thinking. We need to have the capacity for admiring what is good, what's beautiful, what's true. Yeah. Paul's passage in Philippians comes to mind, if any of you know that. Think on these things. So critical thinking and appreciative thinking, there needs to be a balance there, and it needs to be present in every subject, I think even the sciences, but especially I think in history, where we have a little too much critical thinking. And people are they're very proud of themselves when they say, we really encourage critical thinking here. But as I've said, I think that's actually an empty gesture, because it's a way of saying we don't really teach anything positive. And then finally, I've already mentioned this, but say it again, the citizenship should be a goal, especially of secondary education, primary and secondary education. I actually have an issue with the advanced placement movement, in that I think college courses are fundamentally different from high school courses. I think at colleges, for a certain degree of critical thinking is important. I think in high school, of course in American history and civics, it's a portal, it's an initiation into citizenship. So I think citizenship is membership. Remember, I used that term before, membership. You make this history your own. You appropriate it. It's yours as much as anyone else's. Now, it's not just the ideologies. It's also, Mr. Gibson mentioned that I got this award from the Organization of American Historians. It's a very distinguished group of professional historians, and I don't run away from, awards are always useful. But especially if you don't feel like you really deserve them. But professional history has done us a disservice, because it's impregnated with ideology, yes, but even when it isn't, it divides the past up into so many fragments that we don't have a large overarching picture of what it all means. You can see this in some of the better textbooks that have tried to incorporate all the latest scholarly findings, and what you end up with is a mishmash of details, interesting details that don't necessarily add up to anything. So, and we professional historians here, I rank myself as among them. I have a PhD from Johns Hopkins, but we need to take responsibility for that. We need to take responsibility for this fragmentation of the past. It has such enormous consequences. And one reason Howard Zinn's book is so successful, I don't want to encourage you to go out and read it, but take it out of the library, but don't buy it. But he's passed away, but his heirs, they have foundations, and they promote this stuff in the schools, the Zinn Foundation. So you're just look at the book, and you'll see one of the things about it is it's actually a fun read. It's like reading a comic book compared to real history, but it is fun to read. It makes sense. You can imagine young people, and of course it feeds into the sort of teenage rebelliousness. Yeah, all these, George Washington turns out to be a really rotten character, and not like Dad always said. And it feeds into this sort of adolescent rebellion that is, it's maybe something that has to come, but when it comes, maybe that it can pass quickly. It doesn't need reinforcement from textbooks. So most textbooks are more conscientious than that. But they're bad because they don't make sense of all this detail. And Zinn, in his own way, makes sense. When I was, about 20 years ago or so, 25 years ago, I did a little book for the Intercollegiate Studies Institute called The Student's Guide to U.S. History. It was really for college students. And very short, it's like 100 pages long. And I had a bibliography in it at the back of books you should read. And it did not include a textbook. And I've probably gotten 100 letters over the years. It's a lot of letters for a history professor to get. And from people saying, can you recommend a textbook? You don't have a textbook in here. And I write them back and say, there's no textbook I can recommend. And after a while, I even had a sort of macro on my computer where I kind of gave the response to these letters. And it hit me at one point, it's just such a cop-out by me. To say, oh, there's nothing out there, nothing any good. It sort of, I think there probably was one person who said, why don't you do something about this? I don't remember, but I suspect there was somebody, some high school teacher who, in a voice at once pleading and accusatory, saying, why don't you do something about this? And so I started feeling guilty, and guilt is a very productive emotion for me. And when in 2014, the College Board, which is the organization that administers advanced placement testing, they revised the standards for the AP test in U.S. history. And it was appalling what they did, because they took the founders, they took the debates over ratification of the Constitution, they took all sorts of things that you would think were essential. And instead just went on and on about the triangle trade and slavery and so on. And I ended up getting involved with a group, and I ended up being the one who actually wrote a letter. We wrote a letter to the College Board, an open letter, so it was published, it was out on the internet and picked up in various publications, pleading with the College Board not to do this, not to make these changes. They never acknowledged the letter, but they did back down, which is a source of satisfaction. However, all the major textbook publishers had already changed their textbooks in line with the revised AP test. Since withdrawn, but the books, the show must go on. The books were in press. So people who were involved in the letter writing campaign, you write a good letter and everybody thinks you can write a book. So people say, well, you need to write a book. And I said, or somebody needs to. And I said, yeah, I hope we can find somebody. And finally, I sort of gave in to my guilty feelings and did it. And I didn't really want to, because for the reasons I mentioned a little while back, that I knew it would bring me grief, which it actually hasn't. It's funny, my colleagues in the profession have just basically ignored it. That's the truth. So that gives you a sense of some of the reasons why I wrote the book, and this. I don't know how we're doing on time. We're a little worried, but I have a few. I want to talk a little bit about the title, and then I want to conclude with this way of knowing thing, because I think you'll like this, and it gives you something very concrete to take away. A few distinctives. It's a book. At the same time this came out, Pearson, which is the largest textbook publisher, announced a policy of digital first, which basically means if you really want a hard copy, we can print on demand, but the world is moving towards everything emanating from our digital platform, and your students will just be carrying around iPads, and they don't need to have books. And this is really. I hope I'm not stepping on any toes here, but I'm a great believer in books, in that books are. And I could go on. I could give a whole lecture about that, put you all to sleep. But but I think the one thing that is incontrovertible is that studies that have been done about reading comprehension that compare reading from a screen to reading from a piece of paper is that invariably reading comprehension is better from a book or a printed text than from a screen. And there may be a generational thing. There may be more, as the next generation becomes more natively digital, God forbid, that difference may. But so far, all signs are that this is not a superior way to convey information. The book was not written by a committee. I was the only one writing. I bear sole responsibility. My wife read every chapter, and she saved me for some really stupid things. But I didn't have research assistants. I didn't take leave of absence. I just, every night after dinner, I would go on up to my study and write for a little while. And somehow or another, it all got done. Very quickly, too. About a year is all it took. It's not dumbed down, which has not caused any problems. Nobody that I know of has made a serious complaint about. And there are these three thematic distinctives in the title. And let me just do that and then I'll close. It's land of hope. America is not just an idea. You hear this all the time. America is an idea. It's not geographical. Well, no, it is geographical. America is a place. I said and I meant that we're not a blood and soil nation, that's for sure. But we are a country. Arlington National Cemetery is not just a place that commands our devotion because of the American idea. And I have a whole chapter of the book devoted to this, to how we can be those devoted to universal ideals, but also to the particular needs and glories of our nation. So I encourage you to read that if you get your hands on it. And you could buy that. You have my permission to buy Land of Hope. Just don't buy Howard's Inn. Second, hope. A free will, desire to rise in the world, a spiritual quality about this nation. Hope because everybody, with the exception of those who came over in bondage, and that's a big exception, not huge in numbers, but huge in terms of the weight it has for us. But by and large, people who are coming freely from Europe, from Asia, from all over. You see her, the same little old lady here, as in a kind of dual vision. You look at her face and you see not only the face she has, but the face she had, even if it only peeks out in fleeting moments, or when you see a tick that, I remember when she did that when we were 17 or 23 or whatever. So you experience her as a life in motion. And I hope you maybe are beginning to see what I'm getting at, is that you might feel sadness that, generally what happens over the course of time is not pleasant. But what can't be helped is that in some way both people are still alive to you at that moment. The person that you used to know is still alive in there. In other words, the past obtrudes itself. The past is imminent in the present. It's still there. That's the kind of epiphany, kind of special insight that history reliably and regularly provides, that we see the past peeking through into the present. William Faulkner said, famously, the past isn't even past, and I think that's what he was talking about. Now, there's a lot more that I would need to do to keep you here all night to try to trace how that relates to studying, the Kansas-Nebraska Act or the Dred Scott decision or whatever. But I think it's a way of thinking about how history makes us think in different ways. It makes us think not just of concepts frozen in a particular moment, but of the temporal element, which is what we exist in, what we human beings exist in. We exist in time. Not for nothing that St. Augustine devotes one of the chapters of his Confessions to time, which he says in the end he can't quite figure out. Thank you all very much. Do we have time for...
I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
If you'll mingle a little after?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay, let me get this out of your way.
See this real quick.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you all see, this came from the White House.
No. I wish.
Short live.
Yeah. I guess I just have to jump down from here. Hope I make it. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. McClay. Thank you again, Eddie, wherever you are.
Oh, Eddie. Wow. Where are you? Oh, that was fantastic.
I'll wrap this up so everyone can head home, though Dr. McClay said he will hang out for a little bit if folks want to chat with him or ask him any questions. I just want to mention a few things about items on your chair. If you were here for the Dr. in October, maybe repetitive, but it's essential. You've got 2 flyers, one of which